She is a monster, nearly 8 million kilograms of steel, 115 metres long, capable of carrying a dozen missiles and close to 30 torpedoes.
What do America's most dangerous submarines really look like beneath the waves? These steel giants stretch longer than skyscrapers laid on their side.
The 15th Virginia-class submarine, the USS Colorado. She's 377 feet long. She can dive to depths greater than 800 feet. She can operate at speeds greater than 25 knots.
Armed with weapons powerful enough to wipe out continents. Some are hunters, some carry doomsday firepower.
The Virginia-class is acoustically the stealthiest submarine that the U.S. Navy has ever produced.
And one secret design is now taking shape that could change naval warfare forever. Stay tuned, because you'll want to see this. USS Virginia, the blueprint for modern submarines. USS Virginia is more than just a submarine. She's the trailblazer of the Virginia class, America's most modern line of fast attack boats. In Navy language, calling something a class means it's the first in a family. The blueprint, the rest follow. Each sibling in that family carries the same core design, the same hull shape, reactor type, and basic systems. But later ones sneak in upgrades, smarter electronics, expanded weapons bays, tighter layouts. She's a long steel predator, 377 feet from bow to stern, 34 feet wide at her thickest point. Submerged, she displaces close to 7,800 tons of water. Imagine flipping a mid-rise office building on its side and sending it silently gliding beneath the waves. The Navy only admits she can dive deeper than 800 feet and run faster than 25 knots. Past that, they won't say a word, because what enemies can't measure, they can't prepare for. Her story begins in the 1990s. The Cold War was over, defense budgets were shrinking, and the Navy had a problem. They had just finished designing the Seawolf class, enormous, lethal, and cripplingly expensive. At billions of dollars each, the Navy could only afford 3. What came next had to be smarter, leaner, and still terrifying to America's rivals. That answer was Virginia. Building one of these predators doesn't come cheap. The early boats cost around $2.8 billion apiece, and the larger versions with extra payload sections now stretch closer to $3.6 billion to over $4 billion each. The way she was built was just as bold as her design. Instead of leaving the entire job to one yard, the Navy split it. Electric Boat in Groton, Connecticut, and Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia worked in tandem. Each built sections of the submarine, traded them, and stitched them together. This wasn't just about cutting costs. It forced the yards to learn from each other, kept both skilled, and built a rhythm that eventually allowed 2 submarines a year to roll off the line. That build system, born with Virginia, is still the backbone of American submarine production. Virginia herself took shape quickly. The Navy signed the contract in 1998, laid her keel a year later, and by August 2003, she was sliding into the Atlantic. Linda Johnson Robb, daughter of President Lyndon B. Johnson, served as her sponsor. On October 23, 2004, she was officially commissioned. She also made history as the first American submarine designed entirely on computers. Every cable run, every pipe, every bunk was modeled digitally before steel was ever cut. One of her boldest leaps forward wasn't about firepower, it was about eyesight. Old boats relied on periscopes, those long steel tubes that punched through the hull and forced the control room to sit directly underneath. Virginia threw that out. Instead, she carries photonics masts, telescoping camera stacks with day, night, and infrared sensors. These beam video into the control room, where sailors watch the surface on massive wall-sized displays. It's the difference between peering through a soda straw and standing in front of an IMAX screen. And because the control room no longer had to sit under the periscope, designers moved it down to a wider deck, freeing space and giving the crew a smarter layout. At her core beats the S9G nuclear reactor, built to last her entire 30-year life without ever refueling. Imagine buying a car that never once needs gas. That reactor powers turbines that spin a pump jet propulsion system instead of a traditional propeller. The pump jet is smoother, quieter, and harder to track. For a hunter in the deep, silence isn't just an advantage, it's survival. Her bite is just as sharp as her silence. Virginia carries 4 21-inch torpedo tubes loaded with the Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo. These are wire-guided killers designed to crush submarines and rip the keels out of ships. And the real sting? The torpedoes are constantly upgraded with new software, making them smarter and deadlier without ever swapping the hardware. But Virginia wasn't built just for torpedoes. Flexibility was part of her DNA. As the first of the line, she carried 12 vertical launch tubes in her bow, each ready to fire a Tomahawk cruise missile. Tomahawks are long-range assassins, able to fly 1,000 miles, skim over terrain, and hit a single building with precision. On Virginia, they can be fired in a rapid salvo, delivering a sudden punch without tying up her torpedo room. Later, submarines in the class switched to 2 larger payload tubes that each carried 6 missiles. But Virginia kept her dozen and proved in testing that they worked. Stealth is her true weapon. Her hull is wrapped in sound-dampening tiles. Every piece of machinery is carefully mounted to keep vibrations from leaking into the water. Everything about her is tuned to vanish into the ocean's background noise. Early boats like Virginia carried a massive spherical sonar array in the bow. Later, subs in the class swapped it for the large aperture bow sonar, a horseshoe-shaped water-backed array that was cheaper, easier to maintain, and sharper at listening passively. This rolling system of upgrades, new hardware every few years, instead of waiting decades for a new design, started with Virginia. She also plays a role that never shows up on recruiting posters. Virginia is a secret taxi. Her torpedo room can be reconfigured into bunks for a platoon of special operators. She carries a large lockout chamber that lets divers slip in and out underwater without ever surfacing. And in recent years, the Navy has tested unmanned undersea vehicles that launch and recover right through her torpedo tubes. If you want the single moment that summed her up, it came in 2008. During operational testing, she fired 3 Tomahawks, 2 from her vertical launchers and 1 from a torpedo tube. It was quiet, almost routine, but it proved this new family of submarines could do the 2 hardest things at once: sneak close and strike far. Since then, Virginia has lived a rhythm of steady deployments. 6 months out, 6 months home, sliding into the European theater, supporting national strategy, then returning to New London to modest pierside applause. Life on board is its own balancing act. About 130 sailors run a machine that's equal parts nuclear reactor, weapons factory, and stealth lab. Space is always tight, but compared to older boats, Virginia feels almost roomy. Of course, Virginia didn't appear out of thin air. To see where she came from, you have to look back to the Cold War's most famous predator. USS Los Angeles, the Cold War hunter that never slept. USS Los Angeles was the prowling shadow that kicked off a dynasty. SSN-6-88, the lead boat of what became the legendary Los Angeles class, was the first of a family that would dominate the U.S. Navy's fast attack fleet for decades. At 362 feet long and 33 feet wide, she was a nuclear-powered predator built to disappear. Fully loaded, she displaced nearly 6,900 tons, yet she could ghost through the Pacific with unnerving silence. The Navy only admitted she could go faster than 25 knots and dive deeper than 650 feet. But everyone knew those were just the safe numbers they gave the public. The truth was always deeper, faster, quieter, and classified. To anyone on the outside, Los Angeles was a rumor in steel. Her story began in the early 1970s, with Cold War tension pressing down on every design choice. The contract was signed, her keel laid at Newport News in January 1972, launched in April 1974, and commissioned on November 13, 1976. For her time, Los Angeles was a staggering investment, about $900 million in the early 90s, which works out to nearly $1.9 billion today. Barely months after she entered service, she was already making history. On May 27, 1977, President Jimmy Carter, himself a former submariner, sailed with her alongside Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy. Beneath her skin beat the S-6G reactor, a pressurized water plant that turned steam into electricity and propulsion. Exact performance was secret, but it gave her something unmatched at the time: endurance. Nuclear power meant she could stay at sea for months, only limited by food and the stamina of her crew. A diesel submarine always had to think about fuel. Los Angeles never did. That freedom, loitering on the far side of the ocean, sprinting when sonar picked up something suspicious, or vanishing when enemies searched, was game-changing. Her weapons fit the role. 4 21-inch torpedo tubes gave her the punch of the Mark 48 heavyweight torpedo. At first, Los Angeles didn't have vertical launch tubes for missiles. That came later. But even in her earliest days, she could fire Tomahawk cruise missiles through her tubes, turning from submarine hunter to land attack sniper in the span of minutes. Later sisters in the class, the Flight 2 and 688I boats, added 12 dedicated vertical launch cells. But the lead ship proved you didn't need them to make a difference. More than her steel and weapons, it was where she went that cemented her importance. After commissioning, Los Angeles plunged straight into Mediterranean workups, NATO exercises, and a whirlwind of training. By the late 70s and 80s, she was in the thick of Westpac deployments, slipping into the Western Pacific on patrols that remained buried in classified logbooks. The rhythm was relentless. Out on patrol, upkeep in Subic Bay or Guam, a brief port call in Hong Kong, then back out again. Sailors called her a travel machine, but in truth, she was a ghost factory, producing presence without fanfare. What made Los Angeles more than a one-off prototype was evolution. She was the first draft of a family that would stretch to 62 boats built over nearly 25 years. The class split into 3 flights. The early boats looked like Los Angeles herself, with a spherical bow sonar and 4 tubes. The middle batch introduced vertical launch cells. The final 23, the 688UI boats, were quieter, tougher under the ice, and carried upgraded combat brains. That rolling improvement kept the design alive long past what anyone expected, and made it the backbone of the Navy's fast attack force. Inside, life aboard Los Angeles was all business. Before the age of photonics masts and massive flat panel displays, crews worked with periscopes, consoles, and endless teamwork. The fire control party worked in whispers. Sonar operators strained to pull a single faint sound out of ocean static. Navigators threaded black water with nothing but charts and math. It was cramped, hot, and efficient. And for those who served, It was addictively purposeful, a life where every task mattered because mistakes couldn't be undone. Even her name mattered. Submarines used to be named after fish, but the Los Angeles class broke that rule and took the names of American cities instead. Naming subs after cities made people pay attention. It meant parades, sponsors, and hometown pride, with communities invested in their submarine. Much of what Los Angeles actually did will never be unsealed. But the breadcrumbs sketch out a career that stretched from Cold War cat-and-mouse games to post-9/11 patrols. She trained crews. She taught the Navy how to wring every ounce of performance from the class. She shifted seamlessly from tracking Soviet submarines to missions focused on land attack, intelligence collection, and supporting special operations. She did it all for over 30 years, a long time to remain sharp in a world that changes quickly. Like every submarine, she carried traditions. In 2007, as the oldest attack boat in the Pacific, she became guardian of Rear Admiral Richard O'Kane's cribbage board. O'Kane, a Medal of Honor hero and skipper of USS Tang, had left behind that board as a good luck charm. The rule was simple. The oldest sub in service kept it until she retired, then passed it on. Los Angeles took it to sea, and when her time came, she handed it to USS Bremerton. It was just a small wooden board, but it carried decades of pride and memory. By 2010, her career was coming to a close. The Navy held a farewell ceremony at Pearl Harbor in January before sending her north to Puget Sound for inactivation. She made a final visit to her namesake city, then entered the careful process of shutting down a nuclear submarine, removing fuel, dismantling systems, recycling steel. She was officially decommissioned in February 2011, and by the next year, she was gone, cut apart and melted down, her metal turned to civilian use. But the class she started is still out there. Submarines like San Juan, Helena, Charlotte, Key West, and many others still slip under the waves from Norfolk, San Diego, Pearl Harbor, and Guam. Yet even a predator like Los Angeles pales next to the submarine that carries America's ultimate insurance policy. USS District of Columbia, America's silent doomsday machine. Think of a steel ghost, half the length of the Empire State Building, sliding away from a pier and sinking beneath the waves until the ocean swallows her whole. No splash, no trace, just gone. That will be the USS District of Columbia, the first of America's new Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines. She isn't built to chase headlines or duel other ships. She's built to disappear, and in her silence sits the power to end civilization. That's the point. As long as she exists, no rival will gamble on pushing the button first. She's huge, about 560 feet long and 43 feet wide. Submerged, she displaces more than 20,000 tons, bigger than the Ohio class she's replacing. That kind of steel ghost doesn't come cheap. The lead boat alone is tagged at roughly $18.1 billion, while the follow-on submarines are expected to average about $11.4 billion each. When she finally sails, Columbia will be the biggest submarine the United States has ever built. But she carries fewer missile tubes, 16 compared to the Ohio's 24. That sounds like a downgrade until you look closer. Every inch of her is optimized. Every tube paired with electronics, sonar, and propulsion systems tuned from day one for silence. Columbia isn't about carrying more, it's about carrying smarter. At her core is a nuclear engine built to outlast her. The S-1B reactor is designed to power the sub for her entire 40-plus year service life, without ever cracking the hull open for a midlife refueling. The old Ohios had to come home after 20 years for a refuel that sidelined them for years. The power plant ties into something America has never fielded on a boomer before: an integrated electric drive. Instead of gears grinding from reactor to propeller shaft, the reactor generates steam. The steam spins turbines. The turbines feed electricity into a massive motor. And that motor quietly turns the pump jet propulsor at the stern. Fewer moving parts, less noise, less to break. The ocean is full of sound: currents, storms, whales. But Columbia has been engineered, so her voice disappears into that background. And then comes the missile farm. In the belly of the ship sit 16 launch tubes, each the size of a small silo. They're built in modular blocks called quad packs, 4 tubes per block, bolted into the hull like puzzle pieces. It's not just an American trick. Britain's new dreadnought submarines use the exact same system. For the first time in modern history, the US and UK will share the same missile compartment architecture. Each tube holds a Trident 2D5 missile, the workhorse of America's sea-based arsenal. Over the next decade, the fleet will move to an upgraded D5LE2 version, an overhaul that keeps Trident relevant into the 2080s. New guidance, new electronics, hardened brains. The whole system refreshed so that, as long as Columbia sails, the missiles she carries will remain the most credible second strike weapon on Earth. That is the essence of deterrence. Knowing that even if someone lands a first punch, the answer that comes back will erase their map. Her weapons outside the missiles stay simple. She still carries 21-inch torpedo tubes for Mark 48 heavyweight torpedoes. They're not for picking fights, they're insurance. Columbia's stealth doesn't stop with her reactor or her missiles. Her sensors and control surfaces are built to sharpen her invisibility. In the bow sits a massive large-aperture sonar array derived from the Virginias, but even larger, tuned for listening instead of broadcasting. At the stern, she carries an X-shaped rudder system instead of the old cross. 4 fins canted in an X give finer control when the boat creeps at low speeds, perfect for sliding quietly off a coastline or trimming into depth before vanishing on patrol. That gives better balance for a machine that weighs more than 2 billion pounds. Life inside is a relentless routine. About 155 sailors per crew, split into the blue and gold teams, so one crew trains while the other patrols. Inside, there are stacked bunks, mess decks that serve food around the clock, a gym squeezed into a room the size of a storage closet, and constant drills. And here's the brutal truth. The District of Columbia doesn't even exist as a finished submarine yet. Her keel was laid in 2022. Right now, she's still a collection of giant steel sections under cranes at Electric Boat's shipyards in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Commissioning isn't expected until around 2030. Construction has hit snags, workforce shortages, supply chain tangles, the sheer pain of building a first-in-class nuclear machine. The Navy has admitted the schedule has slipped by a year or more. But the stakes won't let them miss the finish line. The first Ohios start retiring in 2027. By the early 2030s, Columbia has to be on patrol, or America risks a gap in its nuclear shield. This massive project is too much for one yard alone. General Dynamics Electric Boat leads, but Huntington Ingalls Newport News Yard is a full partner. Sections of the submarine are built in both places, then joined like puzzle pieces in Connecticut. It's the same 2-yard dance that matured on Virginia-class attack subs, scaled up to a monster. Columbia may be the giant of today, but the Navy is already drawing up something new, something faster, quieter, and even more lethal. SSNX, the future apex predator of the deep. Think of the ocean as a chessboard stretched across the entire planet. On that board, the most dangerous pieces don't sit in plain sight. They glide silently under thousands of feet of water, hidden, patient, waiting. The Navy's next great piece in that game has a name both plain and mysterious: SSNX. In Navy language, SSN is the tag for a nuclear-powered fast-attack submarine, the hunter-killers of the fleet. The X isn't a flourish. It literally means the design hasn't been nailed down yet, but the intent is crystal clear. SSNX isn't about incremental tweaks. It's about building the apex predator of the deep, the boat that can outrun, outfight, outsense, and outlast anything a rival Navy can throw into the water. The Navy calls its requirement ocean superiority. That's a loaded phrase. It means this isn't just about coastal stalking or sneaking around in the shallows like we sometimes imagine. This is about blue water, the open ocean far from home, where the most serious adversaries operate. The brief is bold: faster through the water, quieter across the speed range, more payload tucked into the torpedo room, and the ability to quarterback whole swarms of unmanned undersea vehicles without even sweating. Put simply, SSNX has to be a step change, not a sidestep. The timeline underlines how big a bet this is. This isn't a next summer kind of project. It's decades away. Originally, the Navy wanted the first procurement in the mid-20s. Now, it's officially pushed to fiscal 2040. Both for budget breathing room and to make sure the design is right before anyone cuts steel. In the meantime, Virginias keep rolling off the line to carry the load, and the Columbia-class boomers eat up the top priority slot. But SSNX still soaks up serious money. The fiscal year 2026 request set aside more than $600 million in research and development just for this future submarine, divided between hull and systems studies on one side and next-gen nuclear propulsion on the other. This is the slow, expensive homework phase, the unglamorous work of running tank tests, crunching acoustic models, and trading volume against silence until the numbers line up. Ask any sailor what they want in the next attack boat, and the answer is Seawolf's speed and payload, Virginia's stealth and sensors, Columbia's life of ship reactor availability. Put those three together, and you get the silhouette of the requirement. A boat that can sprint without screaming, stalk without being heard, hit harder with more weapons and more robots in the torpedo room, and stay at sea longer with fewer interruptions. That combination pushes displacement upward because quiet takes space. The more you isolate machinery, the more room you need. The bigger the sonar arrays, the more volume you eat. Analysts watching the trade studies expect SSNX to be larger than Virginia and maybe even larger than Seawolf, north of 10,000 tons submerged if the Navy's ambitions survive contact with reality. This won't just be another torpedo and tomahawk hauler. The real revolution is in what the Navy calls horizontal payload, the torpedo room. That's the flexible bay you reconfigure when the mission changes. In SSNX, it won't just be racks of torpedoes and missiles. It'll also be interfaces and cradle space for unmanned undersea vehicles, distributed sensors, long-range drones, and whatever else the job calls for. The vision is simple but radical. One patrol, you're stacked with torpedoes and mines. The next, you're babysitting a team of robotic scouts, launching and recovering them through your tubes, feeding them power and data, then pulling their eyes and ears back into your combat system. The submarine becomes not just a hunter, but the quiet nerve center of a messy, distributed undersea network. That leads straight to the buzzword that actually matters: decision superiority. This means know what's happening faster, and act smarter than the other guy. Anyone who's ever sat in a control room will tell you the hardest calls often hinge on faint, ambiguous contacts. A whisper of a line on the sonar waterfall. Is it a merchant ship hundreds of miles away? Or is it a rival attack sub close enough to ruin your day? SSNX is being designed to chew through more raw information, fuse it cleanly, and serve it up in a way that lets humans make better decisions under pressure. More sensors, better computing, displays that actually give clarity instead of clutter. Of course, ambition always collides with money. The Navy's own planning numbers peg each SSNX at around $7.1 billion apiece. The Congressional Budget Office, more cautious, pushes that closer to $8.7 billion. Either way, you're talking about a boat that costs more than a Virginia, with a payload module, but less than a Columbia-class boomer. It's tempting to picture futuristic doodads, hypersonic this, laser that, but the real breakthroughs are quieter, literally. Hull forms that slice through water with fewer whispers at both low and high speeds. Machinery isolation so refined, you can hear the difference just walking across a compartment. Power distribution that doesn't broadcast a signature to anyone listening. And combat systems whose software can be upgraded like a smartphone without ripping apart steel. These are the boring, invisible kinds of excellence that keep a submarine hidden when it has to sprint across an ocean, or slide out of shallow water at periscope depth, or loiter for days in an area where the environment itself wants to give you away. One debate flickers in the background: nuclear fuel. Some argue for low-enriched uranium reactors for non-proliferation optics. The Navy's answer is a firm no. The performance hit, the redesign cost, the delays, none of it pays off militarily. SSNX will stick with highly enriched fuel that lasts the life of the boat. The same philosophy driving Columbia. The payoff is simple freedom. Freedom from midlife refueling overhauls. Freedom to plan patrols without yard periods looming. Freedom to keep pressure on the far side of the world without pause. Adversaries aren't sitting still. Russia is still building advanced attack submarines. China has grown its undersea fleet at a pace that stunned planners a decade ago. Both are pouring money into long-range sensors and anti-submarine weapons designed to shrink the ocean for American boats. The U.S. answer isn't to build more hulls than they do, but to leap ahead in capability, to make SSNX so quiet, so versatile, and so effective that no rival commander would dare take the gamble. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.